Last year, this Atari. Now the kid wants a computer. Better idea. The supercharger from StarPath. Don't cost much. Plug it in the Atari and play supercharger computer games that cost under $15 each. And the supercharger comes with this phaser patrol game. Rocket stuff. And the kid can fight those commie mutants from space. 'Cause they're out there.
Available at fine stores everywhere.
Everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. I would wish everyone a happy 4th of July, but it is the 6th of July, which is not a holiday.
No, it's not a holiday. Could be somebody's birthday.
It could be. Happy birthday to all you July 6th
Happy birthday to July 6th birthdays. Maybe we should start every episode with going into the newspaper and finding out whose birthday is it today, and then reading out happy birthdays to people.
And then we can end the episode by going into the newspaper and reading out the obituaries.
To the wish people happy death day?
Yeah, we'll just like balance it out. You know, we'll start the episode out reading about births, and then we'll end the episode reading about those who passed on. Well, Seth, enough talking about people's birthdays or the obituaries in the newspaper. What have you been recently playing?
First, I want to I have a channel announcement. Beat another game.
Nice. I like how that is a big deal for us because we don't beat games frequently.
That's true. I've beaten 5 this year, maybe 6. I do have a list of games that I've beaten. I write a note. Whenever I beat a game, I write the name of the game, and then I write a note about the game to say what I thought about the game, just like general thoughts. Like when I beat Old Skies, I wrote how I liked it a lot. And when I beat the game There Is No Game, Wrong Dimension, I wrote that I liked it and enjoyed it. It's a fun puzzler. It's a fun puzzling game. It's got like 6 pretty long levels. They're pretty cool though. It's a kind of a meta game where you play a little bit of like you interact with the background, you interact with title screens and all sorts of stuff. And then there is a little like Legend of Zelda RPG game that you play in, and it's funny. I liked it a lot. I thought it was a good time. There were some obtuse puzzles, which when you're playing like a puzzle kind of adventure game, it's expected that there are some obtuse puzzles. I was playing another adventure game, Locomotive, which I think I was talking about as well, and I feel like some of those puzzles are more obtuse than the ones that were in There Is No Game, Wrong Dimension. I think there is definitely some okayness that can come through for having an obtuse puzzle, but I'm not also going to spend like 30 hours trying to figure out that I had to combine these like weird things or click this very specific spot at this very specific time. Like if I get frustrated after a few moments, I look something up. So ultimately it's been fun. I think it was a good game. There is no game, Wrong Dimension. Definitely took a twist that I was not expecting, and I enjoyed it. I like the aesthetic. I would check it out if you're into puzzle games. I think it's a fun time. I liked it a lot. Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and Chapter 4 were probably my favorites. And then the rest of the chapters were fine, but definitely 2, 3, and 4 were my favorite. Though recently I've been playing Planet Crafter, which was developed and published by Miju Games, released back in April of last year. It's a space survival open world game where you are terraforming a planet. It's designed for 1 to 10 players. I've been playing by myself, and you are attempting to alter the ecosystems of a planet to make it able to be habitable. So you have to survive on limited oxygen because you haven't terraformed the oxygen yet. You have to collect resources and build places for you to live, or at least survive from having no oxygen, like a base. And I like a lot of things about it. Sometimes I get into moods to do crafting games like Planet Crafter or Subnautica or those type of games. I like Planet Crafter because there is no jump scares or monsters or anything to deal with like fighting anything. It's just you and the elements. So if you want to like go out and explore a cave system, like you just have to plan to explore it by building enough oxygen reserves and water reserves to make sure that you can make it out and back. You can actually go into like builder mode too, where there's just like no survival mechanics at all. I put in normal survival mechanics. I think sometimes not having the like running out of oxygen could just make the game a little too boring. I think you need that like the threat of death, as it were. I think I made it's not too hard, where like if I die, I think I just drop some items and I can go pick them up. They do have like a hardcore mode where if you die, your game is just deleted, I think. It's like you're just like it's over. But overall, it's been pretty fun. While building your base, you have to build up like things to generate heat, oxygen, and balance out the pressure to create a new biosphere. And those are fun, trying to build those materials and make sure you get enough power to going to them and balancing all of that. So it's been a good time. You have to get enough terraforming points to get like a blue sky, and that's not the end. Like you can eventually, from my understanding, you can go to other planets and terraform them too. So like you eventually build like a ship and like leave the planet, go to another planet, start terraforming. In order to get just a blue sky, it's 175,000 or 1.75 million. It's a lot of terraforming points just to get like the first base. Like, that's the starting amount of terraforming points. I'm at, like, 40,000? So it's, like, 1.7 million. So I got a ways to go. And it's been a lot of fun. So, yeah, Planet Crafter, if you're looking for a fun, really good-looking crafting game, then check it out.
Great.
Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you been playing recently?
Seth, recently I've been playing another Doctor Who game because I'm on a kick of playing Doctor Who games, as I mentioned last week. So last week I played Dalek Attack, which was a game from the 90s. This week I played Doctor Who The Adventure Games City of the Daleks, released in 2010. It was developed by Sumo Digital and published by BBC Wales Interactive. City of the Daleks is episode 1 of an episodic adventure game series produced by BBC Wales Interactive, originally free, but later sold via Steam and then delisted. I actually owned a copy of City of the Daleks, and that's how I was able to play it, though you can't buy it anymore, so you kind of just had to have the executable from when you originally bought it if you want to still play this game. But it is an adventure game where you play as the 11th Doctor, as portrayed by Matt Smith, and you are joined by Amy Pond, his companion, who was portrayed by Karen Gillan, famous now for her appearance in Marvel movies as Nebula. The Doctor and Amy in the game land in 1963 London to see the Beatles, but are surprised to find that London is in ruins because the Daleks have invaded, which is something they like to do. You now must return the timeline to normal and stop the Daleks. It's a fun adventure game. It's kind of a little janky in terms of controls, but a lot of it is like avoiding being detected and solving puzzles and such. So you'll occasionally encounter a puzzle that you have to solve in order to get through something, and between those segments you're usually avoiding being detected by the Daleks. The Doctor does not fight traditionally, so you're not like pulling out a gun and blasting Daleks. You are in fact typically avoiding them. However, the game does feel a little bit, like I said, a little janky, so I think it could have used a bit more polish. To be fair, when the game was originally released, it was sold for free, so it was not a game that they were expecting to make money off of, and it was made by the BBC, which is historically not a very incredibly wealthy company. So I guess it kind of makes sense that their Doctor Who video game would be a little unpolished. Kind of like the show. But that is Doctor Who The Adventure Games, City of the Daleks. There are, I think, 5 other adventure games, so maybe I'll try those out in the episodes to come, but right now I'm just playing this one. Well, today we are going to be talking about a bunch of things, actually. We're talking about weird peripherals. So back in episode 115, we talked about the Zapper when we did our Duck Hunt episode, and we later chatted about Rob, the robot operating buddy, in 119, but there are plenty of other weird peripherals that are worth talking about. So we're going to put together some of the strange ones, and we're doing this for our fan of the show, Andy. So Andy, when he originally reached out to us to talk about micro machines, suggested talking about weird peripherals. So Andy, you're lucky you get 2 episodes for the price of 0 episodes because we don't pay for our show.
That's right. And if you asked for a third thing, we probably cover it as well. Anyway, so if you, like Andy, want us to cover a topic that you want us to talk about, then you can send us an email and ask us to do it. And we will either do it right away or in multiple years.
That's right. Now, there are a wide variety of peripherals, so we're not going to talk about every single one of them because that would be boring. So we're picking out some of the more bizarre ones, some of the more unique ones, and we're going to actually break it down by console, starting off with the Atari 2600. The 2600, despite being pretty simple in terms of the games it offered, did have some interesting peripherals. It had some interesting controllers. There were actually wireless controllers for the 2600. They looked like your standard joystick, except they had a very long aerial antenna sticking out of them because they were radio controlled. So they were basically like using a radio control car, like that style antenna sticking out of the controller.
But they were IR, right? Or
no, it was radio frequency.
Oh, that sounds complicated.
They also had there was the paddle controller, which you could use for Pong. It was kind of like a dial. There was the driving controller, which was identical to the paddle controller. That was used for Indy 500. And there was a keyboard controller, which could be used for a game called Concentration. But one of the more stranger controllers, sadly, never made it past the prototype stage. This was the Atari Mind Link. The Mind Link was going to function pretty similarly to the paddle controller. And the idea was that you would be able to play games like Pong or Breakout. However, you would do this with your mind because it was, in fact, a band that you strapped around your head and you would move your forehead and eyebrow muscles to control the game. This seems incredibly silly, but also kind of innovative because it was like hands-free controllers and also almost seemed like Atari was trying to go for accessibility, which is neat. However, apparently playtesters got really bad headaches when they played the game for a very long time, so they canceled it. So we never got the Mind Link.
Third-party developers would also put out some unique peripherals for the Atari, such as the Supercharger from Starpath. The Supercharger looks like somewhat like a standard Atari cartridge that is slightly longer with a handle and an audio cable that stuck out of the cartridge. This cartridge not only boosted Atari's 2600 RAM from 128 bytes to a whopping 6 kilobytes of RAM. This would also allow you to play a total of 12 games developed by Starpath, which were distributed via cassette. 10 of the titles were available commercially: Phaser Patrol, Communist Mutants from Space, Fireball, Suicide Mission, Escape from the Mind Master, Dragon Stomper, Killer Satellites, Rabbit Transit, Frogger, and Party Mix. Starpath would release 2 more games, but they would only be available via mail order as the company had gone bankrupt: Sword of Saros and Survival Island.
Keep in mind that they were putting out stuff in like 1983, 1984, around the time the video game crash was happening.
Right.
And not only was the video game crash happening, but no one bought their games just in general.
The Supercharger games do have slightly better graphics than what most standard Atari games could do, but for the most part, these games are not that much different from what was available. Communist Mutants from Space, for example, is basically just Galaxian, but with a dash of anti-Russian sentiment, as you have to fight communist mutants. Brian would appreciate it being Galaxian, at least. They're from the planet Ruski, who are angry about their vodka being irradiated.
Another peripheral for the Atari was the Game Line, which was created by Control Video Corporation, and we talked about Game Line when we talked about Sega Channel. But for a reminder, this allowed for players to subscribe to their service that allowed them to download games via telephone line. This is rather novel. It did, however, sell poorly, as the price of the cartridge was about $60, which was a good amount at the time. So today, that is $193 for a cartridge. You then would have to pay for the price of membership, which was $15 in 1983 money, or today, about $50. Then you would have to pay for the game, and the game would be $1 or about $3 today. So you were paying $60 for the cartridge, $15 for the membership, and each game you want to play on this thing was $1. And you could only keep the games for a week. So it wasn't probably the best deal. Neat idea, though. I mean, you were literally downloading games to your Atari 2600 to play, but consumers weren't that impressed. However, Control Video Corporation wouldn't shy away from continuing their work in the world of networking. Distancing ourselves a bit from the peripherals, Control Video Corporation would eventually change their name in 1985 to Quantum Computer Services and work on Quantum Link for the C64 and C128 computers. Quantum Link, or Q-Link, would be used to access various online services such as Habitat, one of the first massively multiplayer online games. In 1991, Quantum Computing Services changed their name once again to America Online. So it's all because of this weird company putting out games for your Atari over phone line that we have, those discs that came in the mail all the time and you didn't know what to do with them.
You got mail. Now back to some weird peripherals. And jumping ahead a bit to the NES, we of course know that the Zapper was a successful piece of hardware that came bundled with the NES. It allowed you to play a variety of light gun-based games like Duck Hunt or Hogan's Alley. Konami tried to also release their own light gun for the NES called the Konami Laser Scope. The Laser Scope is odd. It looks to be like a headset that you would wear as a pilot and has a plastic microphone that wraps in front of your mouth and an eye scope that wraps over your eye. You kind of look like Cyborg from Teen Titans if Cyborg was made of plastic. It's janky looking. The kid on the box looks like he's having some sort of fun. It also doesn't look like he's actually wearing it. It looks like it was just superimposed on his face. Now, you might be asking, Seth, Zach, how exactly is a headset with a microphone a light gun? What is the microphone doing? Why would they include a microphone if you were playing an NES game, which historically had no online capability? So you wouldn't be able to talk to somebody. Well, you were able to talk to somebody. And that person you were able to talk to was the Laser Scope Man. He was a tiny little man that lived in the Laser Scope, and he looked like one of those Death Star people. And whenever you yelled fire as loud as you could, it shot the Laser Scope. So Konami decided it was a good idea to put weird scopes on young little boys and girls and have them look at the TV and yell fire as loud as they can instead of pulling a trigger. That's right, stare at a screen and yell fire over and over again, which is probably not the best word to yell anywhere, especially a movie theater, which I guess you wouldn't be playing the NES in the movie theater, but still, it would teach kids to just yell fire. The Angry Video Game Nerd famously covered the Laser Scope in one of his earlier episodes where he found that you could use any word to activating this device, leading to a predictable usage of some of his favorite words.
Wow, I just shot down a duck by saying
Ultimately, the Laser Scope was negatively received because the microphone was pretty bad. And for a device or a peripheral that relies on the microphone to activate, when you have a bad microphone that just basically goes off on any noise, probably not a great customer experience.
Well, maybe you don't want to wear the stupid eye thing. Maybe you don't want to use a controller. Maybe you want to have the power all in your hand. Mattel came up with a solution for this. That solution was the Power Glove. Released in 1989, the Power Glove is a glove that has a sensor on it and some buttons. The idea is that you would set up some visual sensors on your TV, put on the Power Glove, pointed it at the TV, and boom, you're in control of the game. You move your fingers to do different things, you move your hands to do different things. Different games respond differently. You actually had to input a code for the game you were playing to kind of tell the Power Glove how it's going to interpret these controls. So if you're playing Top Gun, you put in one button command. If you're playing Mario, you put in a different one. The Power Glove would be designed by Grant Goddard and Samuel Cooper Davis of Abrams Gentile Entertainment through Mattel in the US and PAX in Japan. They were assisted by Thomas G. Zimmerman and Jaron Lanier, who had patented the design of an optical flex sensor mounted to a glove, which would measure the finger being bent. The idea of a quote-unquote data glove had been something that had been around since at least the 1970s. In fact, in 1977, there was a non-commercially available glove called the Sire glove from Electronic Visualization Laboratory. It was primarily used by people in like tech. It wouldn't have been a commercially available data glove for you to use at home. The Power Glove was in fact one of the very first commercially available data gloves to be used at home. Nintendo was not officially involved in the development of the Power Glove. They did license it though officially, so it did come out with the Nintendo stamp, and it was featured predominantly in the movie The Wizard, where it is used by Lucas, the rival game player of the movie, who uses the Power Glove in one scene and states,
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
And Lucas in the Wizard movie was stating bad in a good way, I believe.
Right. Yes, he was. But ironically, it did receive some pretty poor reception, largely due to the fact that using the glove was a bit impractical. It didn't always work. And if you didn't set up the sensors properly, it just wouldn't work properly. You know, there were so many variables to getting this thing set up right to work 100% how it's supposed to, that it was just guaranteed to not be well received. However, it sold millions of units and would be a commercial success. So despite the fact it was not well received, it still made money. And I'm going to largely thank the Wizard probably for that. I'm sure that did a lot of heavy lifting for the free advertisement.
Right. I feel like the Power Glove was in other movies at the time, or other TV shows at least at the time. It goes to show you don't necessarily have to have a good product to be successful. You probably can only get away with releasing a crappy product once, maybe twice. Now, what if you wanted to use your controller, but you didn't want the controller to move around? Well, the NES Speedboard is for you. It was produced by Pressman in 1991 and was designed to be a way to allow players to hit buttons faster by not having to worry about it being in your hands. Because the Speedboard is in fact a piece of plastic that you lock your controller into it so that you can push the buttons without holding the controller. But there is a large piece of plastic that you might have to now hold because you now have a speedboard, unless you put the speedboard down somewhere and then I guess lay down with it, or maybe it could go on the floor and hold the controller.
Put it on like a coffee table?
Coffee table, sure.
I don't know how much faster you can be at pressing buttons with your index fingers versus your thumbs.
Moving on from the speedboard, Sega wasn't without peripherals. They, of course, had their own light guns and useful peripherals with like the power-based converter that allowed you to play Master Systems games on your Sega Genesis, basically expanding the library to the entire previous generations of game. Could you take the power-based converter and do the Power of Tower?
No, because the cartridge slot. So the power-based converter literally just fits into your cartridge slot, and it turns the cartridge slot into the Master System cartridge slot.
I see. So you couldn't then put it on the Power of Tower.
No, but you could put it on top of the Power of Tower.
Oh, you could. And would it work?
I don't think so.
Just in case anyone needs a reminder, the Power of Tower is a Sega Genesis, a 32X, a Sega CD.
It's a Sega CD, Sega Genesis, 32X, Game Genie, Sonic and Knuckles, Sonic the Hedgehog 3.
That's the Power of Tower that works with that game combination.
And you could probably fit a couple more things in there, because I think there was also like the X Band, which was like another device that you could probably fit somewhere in there. So
yeah, as long as it either passed through or it did nothing. So beyond those type of peripherals, which kind of got weird, Sega got weirder. The Sega Activator is an example of being pretty weird. It's a controller, but instead of using buttons or whatnot, you used your entire body and activated against it. And by activated, you stepped or kicked around and punched. Essentially, the Activator looks like a plastic octagon that you have to put together like you are setting up a modeled railroad set. Once set up, you stand in the center and you wave your arms and kick your legs in different directions. When the sensor detects your movements, it corresponds to the appropriate button press. Kind of like the Xbox Kinect, which also famously sold pretty well. This technology wasn't unique for the Sega Genesis, as similar technology had already been used in arcades for some of Sega's arcade titles like Dragon Ball Z VRVS in Japan, so it made sense to bring it to the home market. The design of the peripheral was reportedly based on the light harp, instrument by martial artist and musician Asaf Gerner. The light harp used a similar idea of passing your hand or feet over sensors to trigger a reaction. The Activator can work with any game. It's literally just a controller, but certain games were given the Activated moniker and were designed to be played with the Activator, including Best of Best Championship Karate, Eternal Champions, Greatest Heavyweights, and Streets of Rage 3. This device was a commercial failure, largely due to the inaccuracy of the you would be kicking and it would not be pushing the buttons. And like I said, I think Nintendo did something similar too. They had something that was like soft.
well, there's like the Power Pad.
Yeah, they had the Power Pad, which is similar-ish to this technology, but I think they were just buttons. Right?
Yeah, it was like sensor buttons versus like light.
And then Xbox would go on to make the Kinect, and that worked on like cameras watching your movement.
Yeah.
And all of those peripherals performed poorly in the market.
Sega wouldn't be deterred from new ideas. One of their more useful ideas, that's still a little weird, is the TV tuner for the Game Gear. It's a kind of neat idea, right? I mean, the Game Gear used a color screen, and the TV tuner allowed you to plug in a specialized cartridge into the system that had an aerial antenna. Once plugged in and dialed into the right station, you could now watch TV on your Game Gear. It's a really cool idea, right? I mean, you could be on vacation with your Game Gear and you could plug it in and you could watch some TV. Made a lot of sense. Also, Sega was always happy to brag about the fact that they had a color screen versus the Game Boy, which was monochrome. However, you listeners might remember when we talked about the Game Gear, the major problem with the Game Gear. It could barely hold a charge. And when you plugged in the TV tuner, it required tapping into the Game Gear's 34-volt rail to power it. So the battery would drain even faster. So your 6 AA batteries for your Game Gear that lasted about 2 hours now would only last less than an hour. The TV tuner is possibly also one of the very few peripherals that if you received one today, it would be completely useless because a majority of countries don't use analog broadcasting.
Including the US.
Including the US, so you can't dial into anything. You would need to have a analog to digital converter, and those things aren't going to connect to your TV tuner. So, alas, the TV tuner is mostly a paperweight. But you might be asking, where do I sit when I want to watch my Sega TV tuner on my Sega Game Gear? Well, you can in fact sit in the Sega Action Chair. The Sega Action Chair is exactly what it sounds like. It's a chair, but it's also a controller. It was released only in Europe. It is pretty rare because it didn't sell very well. The chair would plug into your console via the controller port. It has 2 ugly joysticks that come out of the base of the chair that you have buttons on, so you can press those. And to move your character in the game, you would have to lean. So you lean left to move your character left, and you move right to move your character right. And depending on which way you lean, the character moves in that direction. And Seth, I want you to look at that chair and tell me how much you want that chair.
First of all, it looks like it would be at home in some sort of convalescent home. There's just a lot of metal bars everywhere. Also, it looks more uncomfortable than the activator. So it's like, do you want to be able to move your character with body movements? Do you want to do it uncomfortably? Get the Sega chair. It looks bad. It also looks like a really cheap type of plastic that you get wrapped on chairs. And I guarantee you paid an arm and a leg for this thing. Now, we already talked about both the SNES's Life Fitness Exertainment and the Max peripheral, MACS peripheral, when we talked about rare video games. However, for those who may not remember or miss that episode, let's talk about them again. The Max, or Multi-Purpose Arcade Combat Simulator, is a bit of a unique case in that it was a peripheral, but not intended to be released commercially. In fact, with a name like Multi-Purpose Arcade Combat Simulator, you probably can figure out who is the intended audience, and that audience is the military. The Max was developed back in 1982 by James Schroeder and the Army Research Institute for the Apple II Plus. You would use a real weapon such as an M16A1 or an M72A2 Law, and there would be an attached light pen that you would have on the gun. While innovative, the technology at the time couldn't really simulate distance. To fix this, the Naval Training Systems Center would develop new specialized light pens with lenses that could better simulate distance. So you just were strapping essentially a light gun on top of your regular gun.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure the Law is in fact an anti-tank weapon, and it is a rocket
perfect.
launcher. So you're pointing a rocket launcher with a light gun at your TV.
No, at the government's TV. In 1986, Max was ported over to the C64 by Litton Industries. That same year, the U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, and U.S. Coast Guard would look to have their own versions of the Max program, which would result in the development of JMAX, or Joint Service Multiple Purpose Arcade Combat Simulator. The next year, the system began to implement recoil simulation, largely due to instructions complaining that the lack of recoil meant the system wasn't accurate to reality. However, it was decided not to fully implement recoil into the system as it seemed costly and unnecessary if training was still using live fire training. So essentially, the instructors were like, this is not like shooting a real gun. And Joint Services said, okay, let's implement recoil. And then the Army said, well, actually, how much is that going to cost? Also, do you still shoot real guns? And the Army said, oh, yes, we do. So they're saying, so you're complaining about some supplementary training? And they said, yes. And they said, we're not doing that. In 1991, the Army Research Institute would commission Sculpture Software to create a version of Max for the SNES, reportedly without consulting Nintendo, who denied any involvement in the production of the cartridge. The SNES port of Max was considered more advanced as the graphics were better, and it felt like you were shooting something that may have actually been a little bit more believable.
For the Life Fitness Exertainment System, this was the system that answered the question that many people have, which is, what if I could play my SNES on my exercise bike? Everyone has asked that question at least once in their life. If you are one of those people, fear not, because the company Life Fitness answered that question, and they teamed up with Nintendo to release the exercise bike that you could plug into your SNES. 2 games were specifically designed for the bike: Exertainment Mountain Bike Rally and a combo cartridge called Exertainment Mountain Bike Rally / Speed Racer, which contained a game called Speed Racer. You didn't need one of these bikes to play either of these games. The games work fine with a regular controller, but having the bike would have been the full experience. The bike itself would fail. When it released, it was sold for a whopping $3,500. Adjusting 1994 prices for inflation, that makes it about $7,695 today. For comparison, a brand new Peloton bike today costs you just a little under $1,500. So for more than a Peloton, you could plug it into the SNES.
I'm just wondering, maybe if they just sold one unit, maybe they would have made their money back.
Maybe. Now, if you didn't feel like buying a bike, but you still wanted to play video games while you got your exercise on, don't worry, because Nordic Track was there for you with their Nordic Quest. The Nordic Quest would hook up into either a SNES or a Genesis and would allow you to use your Nordic Track while also playing video games. The idea of the Nordic Quest was that it basically allowed you to control the game by exercising, and the faster you skied, the faster you went in game. And the handles for this Nordic Quest had the actual buttons on them. Basically, you just take your normal Nordic Track and you tie in the handles and you're good to go.
If guns or exercise wasn't your thing, Singer decided to make their own peripheral, though this time for the Game Boy Color. The Singer Isaac 1500 sewing machine was released around the year 2000. The sewing machine came bundled with a cartridge that would go into your Game Boy Color. You would then link the sewing machine to the Game Boy Color, and with the cartridge you could design patterns or use preset patterns. In Japan, the Singer Isaac 1500 was sold via the company Jaguar, and they released additional software such as Mario-themed cartridges. Was the sewing machine the peripheral for the Game Boy, or was the Game Boy the peripheral for the sewing machine?
I mean, that's
the peripheral?
That's the $1 million question. That's like Ship of Theseus right there, right? If you get rid of one and you replace it with the other.
I mean, a Singer Isaac 1500 has to be about as much as the Game Boy.
They're pricey. I think I saw one for sale for like $900 on eBay. They sometimes pop up for less. I think people sometimes just are trying to get rid of a sewing machine, and they just happen to also be a Singer Isaac, because, you know, when you bought a sewing machine in that time period, you might have not even cared if it connected to a Game Boy or not. But I mean, I guess the Singer Isaac is that question, right? Is it a peripheral? Could you say that the car that has a built-in Game Boy Advance player is the peripheral to the Game Boy Advance?
Right. So in terms of like peripherals that are coming out today, there's not a lot that are coming out beyond iterations of controllers such as fight sticks or retro controllers, such as like getting the N64 controller for the Switch. That's a peripheral. There is also different VR sets such as the PSVR, which is a different peripheral. But beyond that, most of the peripherals are just different ways in regards to standard controller interacting or being like a VR or something similar. Now that we say that, perhaps some classic gaming brothers in the future will look back at the Valve Index and think that that was something silly that people did, and they would be like, oh wow, they had screens up against their eyes. As we look back on the Nordic Quest and look at the man fondly holding his Nordic Quest with a large plastic contraption attached to it so he could play some racing game.
I like that it looks like he's wearing a polo shirt.
He is wearing a polo shirt. He's just setting it up. He's not clearly.
That dude just came from
clearly
Target.
Not exercising. Like, he's just like chilling. He's real happy looking at it. And what is he playing on? Is he playing on a wall? I just want to,
I think
like,
it's like
what
a
is that
projected
game?
screen.
The guy brought his Nordic track to the movies and is playing some racing game on it. Regardless, we don't have any funny peripherals in the modern day because they're not funny to us, or as many funny ones. I'm sure there's some silly stuff that's out there. But in the future, perhaps we'll look on the past and think that the stuff that we do today is weird. Maybe a mouse will be viewed as a funny peripheral. Who knows? We'll find out. Or maybe we won't. Anyway, Zach, he had me play Zero Wing for the Sega Mega Drive in our Retro Rewind. Zero Wing was developed for the Sega Mega Drive for the Japanese and European markets in 1991, a port from a game that was developed for arcades in Japan and North America in 1989 and 1990 respectively. Interestingly enough, it never made a home console release in the North American market until 2020, which is a little bit after the rest of the releases in the 90s, so was really just kind of a third-party group bringing something to the North American market because it never was brought over. In the game, you play as Trent, which I don't think is really relevant because you're in a ship the entire time, but you do play as Trent, and you fly a little Zig space fighter in a sci-fi side-scrolling shooter, or a horizontal shmup, as you might say. Horizontal shoot 'em up. You go through 8 different levels, grabbing power-ups along the way, and the power-ups are cool, they're themed, so like there's a red one that makes multiple ships, there's a blue one that shoots blue razors, there's a green one that shoots homing missiles, and the more of the red, blue, greens that you pick up, the more powerful your red, green, blue does stuff. The game, Zero Wing, definitely holds up. I had a blast playing through it. I think you would have a blast playing through it too if you like horizontal shoot 'em ups. The game is pretty tough, at least for me, because I'm bad at games, but just because I'm bad at games doesn't mean the game's not good. Next week, Zach, you could play Whip Rush for the Sega Genesis.
Sounds good. Did you mention the most important part about Zero Wing?
Did I?
The translation. That's where all your base art belong to us.
Oh, they are. You did have me play Zero Wing in the past, because it is where the translation of all your bases belong to us come from. This time, when you had me play it, I skipped that part because I just wanted to play. But yes, if you're wondering where all your bases belong to us, the meme comes from, it's from Zero Wing, because they translated, they did not localize.
The game that Seth had me play was Super Adventure Island for the SNES, developed in 1992 by Produce! And published by Hudson Soft. Super Adventure Island is basically just Adventure Island for the NES, but this time it's on the SNES. You play as Master Higgins as you explore Adventure Island, a place where a lot of things want to kill you, despite the fact that I think Master Higgins lives there, and I think he likes it. But everything just wants to get you. I don't know. It's a pretty standard platformer. You know, you walk pretty much in a straight line, you jump over obstacles, and occasionally you pick up a skateboard and you can go a little faster. The game feels a lot like the original NES version, but with a SNES coat of paint on it, which is fine. It looks nice, it sounds nice, it plays nice. I think it holds up. If you like Adventure Island games, I don't see why you wouldn't like Super Adventure Island. I'm not super big into Adventure Island games, but I don't dislike them. I don't mind them. I'm just not like, I don't rush to play one. Next week, Seth, you can play Gauntlet 2 for the Game Boy.
Great.
With that, I want to thank everyone for listening to us. Thank you again, Andy, for the suggestion. Hope we did it justice. If you have any memories of playing any weird peripherals with your game consoles, you can email us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found via Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on social media. Look us up, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod, and we're available on our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. With that, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.